want to talk about something. Now, some people, when they hear, a bit of conspiracy theory stuff or whatever, or, things about executive order number blah blah, Alex Jones sort of stuff, they get very jumpy about it all, and it sort of, they feel negativity from it, and they get stressed out by it. And, some of them basically, watch a lot of Alex Jones stuff or, a lot of other stuff on the internet, related to some of the, previous things that the CIA's got up to, or executive orders that are quietly being passed to be able to do this to you or that to you, or some other FEMA thing or whatnot. And they get sort of all on the hop about it, and they can't handle it, and then they just sort of shut off from it all and ignore it all and just put it in the back of their mind, because they basically will tell you that they can't handle the negativity of it, and that it's all negative and it's all doom and gloom, and, and they don't want to live a life with that sort of gloom and doom hanging over the top of them. Well, this sort of stuff, this subject has come up in my family because my uncle used to be on a lot about banking conspiracies and all that stuff in the days when he was alive, and, after he'd been repossessed of, most of his assets. And my father used to say that, I can't handle the negativity. Can we just have something positive? It's always negative, negative, negative. But I've got a different way of looking at all this. And that is, if you sort of take it more or less as a past tense, as a fact, but not sort of like a current thing that's, not like a bear that's waiting out the front door to eat you alive, but more or less as a past tense thing, you don't worry about it as much. And I mean, you got to sort of, if you do get terribly worried and stressed about this sort of stuff, you got to realise, A, these things have been passed, but B, you're not going to walk out the front door and get eaten alive by executive order number blah 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 in the next 5 minutes. C, there has to be the will by, law enforcement or military to actually carry out and enforce this stuff. And then D, they've got to actually enforce it. As for C, you may say, well, what do you mean by the will? Well, they made a lot of laws after the collapse of the Soviet Union, about exporting firearms, particularly the massive hoard of AK-47s and RPGs that had been built up in the Soviet Union. And, they made all these laws against it, all United Nations people and whatnot, and everybody thought, well, that's sorted. Well, the thing was, there wasn't the will by the law enforcement inside those countries to actually carry it out. In part because they were being bribed by these gun runners. But also, you look at England, they had a thing there where Tony Blair basically, I think it was, I'm almost certain it was him, one of them anyway, basically banned hunting. And then the police said, well, the police in these country areas said, we're not going to enforce it. There you go. There's another one. There's also when they said to the military and that in New Orleans that you've got to go house to house and take guns off everybody and disarm everybody. Some done it. About a third of them, I think it was, said yes, we'll carry out that order, and 2/3 of them said no, that is going against their constitutional rights, and they said we're not going to carry that out. We are not going to disarm these people. And I think there was around 2/3 of them said they're not. So that's the case of C. There's times where the law enforcement will just not enforce it. And then what I mean by D is, if they try and enforce something, like pushing everyone into FEMA camps, they've got to actually make it happen. And if they try and push everyone into a FEMA camp and all they get in return is a whole stack of blooming bullets through the front of the blooming, Hummers, or, basically armed resistance, well, then they won't be, they might have the political will to enforce it. They might be willing to enforce it, but then not actually be able to carry through with it because of an uprising en masse of all the people against it. And a lot of these things, some of these laws that are, brought out, to think it's sort of going to happen tomorrow is not necessarily the case. Because if they do it tomorrow, a lot of the times there will be an uprising by the average Joe on the street who couldn't give a stuff about conspiracy theories, who may actually even not be right-wing, may even be a left-winger. And don't flame and doubt that there's plenty of left-wingers that don't have conspiracy theories as well, particularly involving corporations. But, yeah, I wanted to basically say that, don't get caught up stressing about it, because, this stuff, if you just look at it as a past tense case, if you look at it as fact, and you just take it on board as something to remember, to keep in mind, and don't take it on board as a bear waiting out the front door ready to rip your head off. Don't take it on board as they're going to do it any second now to me, and don't sort of allow yourself emotionally to get wound up about it. It won't be something that keeps you awake at night. You basically just got to realise that it may be the case, but it'll be years until there is the political will to enforce anything like that, because it sounds ridiculous, it sounds draconian, and the average Joe on the street wouldn't stand for it. And so then they don't enforce it because the average Joe on the street wouldn't stand for it. And, so therefore it's not going to affect you in 5 minutes. But all the same, I do not recommend just to completely ignore this stuff, but to think of the ramifications of it. But don't get stressed and panicked about it, because panic doesn't get you anywhere. What you got to do is you got to prepare for these sort of things, work out a few scenarios about how it's most likely to go down, and be able to know how to, combat against these sort of things. And, believe me, with all this stuff that if they put something in law, then it's solid concrete, well, in some countries it's not even flaming melted chocolate. It's not even melted butter, these laws, because there'll be a rebel force against it. It's like, when the Arab Spring uprisings, when people had enough, they just had enough. And it doesn't matter if Gaddafi decides to do this law or that law, because there's rebel forces. And in the end, they bloody get him and kill him. So this sort of thing, that if it's a law, then it's just what's going to happen, absolutely full stop regardless, set in concrete, there's nothing you can do to stop it, that's crap. Because there's been plenty of uprisings in plenty of other places before when they have pulled some real nasty crap. And sometimes, like the Soviet Union, and that they are just flaming lambs to the slaughter, and they can't do anything about it. But what you got to do is make sure that you don't allow yourself to get in a corner like that, and then you won't need to worry about it. Work out the scenarios that it would go down if it would, and basically be prepared for, having secondary options, whether it's, being in a militia, or creating or being part of a militia, which would be seen and classed as a rebel force and probably called a terrorist force, because a lot of them do get called that by dictators who are in power at the time that a rebel force comes into fruition. And, you might want to look at other countries, other options such as leaving the country, or, being able to sort of live in between the lines, so to speak, working out, a niche existence, and there's people who go on the run and live for years without proper identity, and they exist for years and years with proper identity. How the hell do you think these illegal immigrants survive? They survive most of their life, in some cases, with no legitimate identity and no legitimate, papers, passports, or anything like that. So that's another option, because there's, someone being caught here only a few weeks ago who was on the run for something like more than 11 years and actually had a job and the whole shebang. There's another town whereby you can basically exist in this country, in this town, as a nobody, more or less. And also the Outback is renowned for, people just wanting to get away, and the Outback's always willing to have workers, and sometimes they're not terribly interested in your history and stuff like that. And that may, if you're sick of the bureaucracy in the city, disappearing way out into, deep into the country may suit you, because they don't like bureaucracy in the country as much as they do in the city. And if, these sort of worries that you'll get caught up in some shenanigan that they're trying to push, people into FEMA camps or something stupid like that, going into an area where in New York City they may allow this stuff to be, to be lambs to the slaughter and all these sort of things to be pushed on them. In these country areas they won't, because there is a different political will and a different attitude in these country areas. Queensland is one of the places that has a very right-wing sort of attitude and a very different attitude from a lot of the rest of Australia. So, that's another thing you may want to think about, is just bugging out to an area where people aren't liable to, be rounded up and sorted out and this and that, because they're sort of disconnected from the mainstream of the rest of society, such as the Outback here. So yeah, that's something I just wanted to say, but I don't let it burn me out, and quite frankly I don't think you should, because there is another way, and so long as you give yourself the chance to have another option, you're not liable to be terribly badly affected by stuff. And always keep in mind that just because this executive order blah blah exists doesn't mean that it's going to eat you alive tomorrow.